Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for joining this learning experience brought to you by DataB from Comcast Technology Solutions. My name is Cody, and welcome back to Techstrong Learning. Before we dive into our conversation today, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes to review. First of all, we are recording our conversation today. So if you miss any of our conversation, if you'd like to watch again later, or if you'd like to share this with the rest of your team, we will be sending you an email shortly after we conclude, and that email will provide you with a link to watch the recording on demand. Now, if you'd like to get involved, there are a couple of ways to do so. Your first option is to use the chat tab on the right side of your screen. And when you find that chat tab, I'd like you to let us know from where in the world you're joining from today. If you have specific questions for us, we do want you to send those in to us. And we want you to send those in using the Q&A tab on the right side of that chat section. We'll do our best to mix your questions into our conversation, but we do have some time set aside at the end today after our demo, and we'll tackle some of your questions then as well. Additionally, if you jump to the handout section, you'll find a full downloadable copy of our pulse meter report, where we'll be pulling a lot of our insights from for our conversation. And my last note is that we will be selecting 2 of our most engaged attendees to win a $50 Amazon gift card. So thank you in advance for your chats and your questions. And filling out our post-webinar survey will also make you eligible for this giveaway. More on that at the top of the hour. So without further ado, I'd like to move straight into our topic, unlocking the power of enterprise security data. And I'm joined today by Amy Heng, Director of Product Marketing at DataB from Comcast Technology Solutions. We're also joined by Aaron Ham, Field Chief Data Officer and Director of Engineering at DataB as well. And keeping this train on the tracks, we've got our very own Mitch Ashley, CTO at Techstrong Group and Principal of Techstrong Research. And Techstrong Research is the team that put together the data for our pulse meter report today. So Amy and Aaron, thank you both so much for joining us today on Techstrong Learning. Mitch, do you want to dive us straight into things?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, in the world of security, many challenges that we're faced with, one of them is getting the right data at the right time to be able to both manage security, respond to incidents, but more importantly, in addition to that, is making sure that we've got the right kind of information to make important decisions about, understand whether we are compliant with our policies, things like that. So I kind of think of security as also having a data challenge, right? Like many other parts of our organizations. And we're going to be talking about that today, both in a couple of ways. One is Amy and Aaron are going to be sharing their experiences and expertise in this area, and they have a lot of depth in this as well. And we're also going to be sharing some data from a pulse meter report, a study that we did, collecting data from Security Boulevard and other parts of our audiences, online audiences at Techstrong. So the data we're going to show you is from people like you who are attending the webinar with us. So before we jump in kind of to the next place here, I'd love, Amy, if you would start, would you introduce yourself to us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, thanks so much, Mitch. And one thing that you said just now that resonates with me as something that Newport Davis, our CISO, has said multiple times is like, that digital transformation is happening all around us, but why is security lagging? It's really time to bring security into the digital transformation as well. And also, hello everyone from California. It's quite early for all of us on the West Coast. But yeah, I'm Amy Heng. I run marketing here at DataB. It's been a really fantastic time. We're solving a really interesting problem right now that actually stemmed from something internal. So we'll dive into that later. But I come from a storied background of being at Splunk, Palo Alto Network, Zscaler, and now here. So really, you can ask me almost about anything. It's been a pleasure and very excited to have this conversation with you.
Fantastic. Privilege having you here as well. So, Aaron, please introduce yourself. Oops, you're on mute, I believe. There we go.
You would think after the pandemic, we would all get used to the mute and unmute button. I'm Erin Ham. I'm the Field Chief Data Officer and Director of Engineering at DataB. I've been at Comcast for about a little over 3 years now. Hard to believe. Time is passing by. So DataB is built off of our internal security data fabric. And I actually sat on that team over the last 2.5 years, helping develop that internal product underneath Newport Davis, who is our CISO. And then as it was commercialized into DataB, moved over into that team to help other customers see the amazing benefits that you get with having all of your data within one repository, normalized, transformed, adding business logic. And so for me, I come from just a data background. I don't come necessarily from cyber, but any and all things data. I have a mathematics background, and then really heavily involved in like storytelling. So taking the data and actually making meaningful insights out of it is where my passion lies.
Highly appropriate. We're going to be talking about leveraging sort of the expertise of data scientists and data platforms and some of those techniques that we can apply to our security data challenges. So, Aaron, perfect. Good to have you. And you referenced Newport Davis, extremely well-known, well-respected CISO, not only in the cable industry or the media industry, but really, I think, in the security industry as a whole. One thing I thought might be good to clarify before we jump in, we've referenced DataB as being part of Comcast Technology Solutions. Amy, do you mind explaining what that is versus what we all know as Comcast, who might deliver internet to our homes and businesses?
Yes, it is not the same Comcast or Xfinity that is working on your cable bill, okay? So I always love to preface that because it is such a funny thing. But yeah, at Comcast, we take cybersecurity super seriously. And part of what Newport Davis has done is look at the problem holistically. And she was a really big proponent of bringing what we have developed and essentially what DataB is it's a commercialized version of it, scalable, it's designed for enterprises. And Comcast Technology Solution is a group within Comcast that puts out a lot of the entrepreneurial solutions that we use in-house at Comcast, NBC Universal, Sky Networks, and brings it to market. So you'll hear things if you go to Comcast Technology Solution about Ad Fusion and other solutions that we're putting to market.
Very good. The old expression, not your father's cable company, right? a part that's bringing you new technology, a lot of things that's been proven and utilized and developed internally. To now using it, bring it to the broader audience. Well, so when we got together talking about doing this research, we wanted to really dive into all the kinds of data that you really need to have at hand for not just incident response or doing, the security operations center, there are a number of functions, but really kind of holistic everywhere from are we implementing the policies that we expect to and are we compliant with those to, where do we have security issues that we may need to nail down? And of course, especially in an organization like Comcast, but really in any enterprise, that's a complex web of data sources, ways that you manage that data, bring it together, operationalize it, do kind of measurement and KPIs and other kinds of activities with it. So we wanted to, in leveraging the audience that Techstrong has with Security Boulevard and other websites, we set out a set of poll questions to them, and we collected data, and from that got some really good input, and also I think some really good insights and observations about that. So it's okay with both of you. I'm going to jump right to that next, and we'll look at some of that data. So, and just to give our audience a heads up, we're going to be showing you some charts. This is not a slide presentation, more just to show you the data. And then we're also going to be doing a demo a little bit later in our conversation. So hang tight. There's lots of good stuff now and coming down the pike in just a few minutes. Okay, so one of the things we first looked at is what percentage of your organization's data is located in a SIM or some form of data repository where you're trying to aggregate this data. And certainly wasn't overwhelmingly that everybody had 100% of, or nearly 100% of their data integrated. Not surprisingly, it's a pretty big challenge, but pretty sizable between the top two answers there, between 75 and 100%. You're looking at, really close to 40% of folks are leveraging those kind of technologies. Not surprising, SIMs have been around for a long time, not something new, but also not fully addressing all the needs we have. What was your reaction to this data, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, I used to work at Splunk, and I remember one thing that really stood out was that not all companies are designed or mature enough or have the capabilities to have a SIM, right? And that's okay because it requires a lot of maintenance. It is not an easy tool, especially considering like companies out there, SIM companies out there are very robust. But what was really significant to me is really like the way we almost worded this is like that data repository you manage. And maybe this is where Aaron, like, I want to know from your perspective, like, do you think this, like, some people interpret this as like this is a cloud storage, I don't manage it, or like I think that was a funny thing that I noticed after the fact. And then so my question to myself was like, well, maybe they don't manage the data repository and maybe it's a cloud base. And so they had a hard time answering this question. Would love to know.
Yeah, so I think at least from my perspective, when I'm thinking about the data repository that I manage, it doesn't matter if it's on cloud, on-prem, it's a SIM, it's a data lake such as Snowflake or Databricks. It really is, am I managing the data in that platform? And
Exactly.
then am I managing the users that have rights to that platform? To me, that's the management of the data repository. I might not be responsible for the disaster recovery or other components of said data repository, but I'm managing it day in and day out, how people are utilizing it, what data is going in there, how is the data getting in there, what does it look like once it's in there? And then ultimately, are people actually using it? So is the data that is going into these platforms usable, or are we just storing it to store it?
That's a good idea. Yep.
I was also curious if you look at the bottom response of 0%, in other words, they're not doing it. A quarter of the folks responded. I think we had, if I remember, well over 200, maybe over 300 responses to this. A quarter of the folks are not doing it at all, right? I'm not sure what using probably individual point tools, right, and trying to juggle kind of spinning plates, juggling balls and bowling pins, and trying to keep security up and running. Is that surprising to you at all, or do you think that's pretty typical what you see in market?
I think it's a little bit surprising. Amy can probably speak a little bit more from the marketing side, but from the day in and day out, I think there's still a lot of growth and maturity that needs to occur, not just within the security organizations, but enterprise data as a whole. We have a lot of old methodologies that we're still utilizing, that there's better practices today, more efficient ways to do that. You might have someone who's been managing an Excel file for the past 10 years on a specific control that we don't need to do that anymore. There's a way better practice and an automated practice in order to get that information. But I think it's about pulling all of those companies forward into our current tech stack. What are the best and best practices and tools that are available today? And then what are we seeing in the marketplace that can help the challenges that they're facing, or I call them medial tasks, repetitive, that don't necessarily take a lot of effort, but it's just time consuming and it requires manual hands-on intervention. How can we move analysts, data scientists, data engineers away from that so that they can focus on more high value tasks to move the company forward?
Yeah, and Mitch, also on this one, what dawned on me is also that companies might know that they need to retain the data, but they don't know where it is or what's still being active. I think, for example, we found a lot of databases that were still receiving data and we just didn't know about it. And that's kind of, as Aaron was kind of mentioning, it can be kind of daunting to try to use data as well. So I think that's where maybe that's really surprising to me. Maybe the 24% that answered this question aren't in like the weeds of it, and so they don't know.
Yeah, I guess we have a data sprawl problem in security, just like we do in the rest of the organization.
Yeah.
Right? We don't always know where it is, probably don't know where it all is until you go through an effort to try to bring it all together. I'm curious your perspective too. Also, Amy, you mentioned having worked at Splunk and observability kinds of technologies, which are all about kind of pulling it all together into one place and then seeing what you can do with it. What's the difference between that and maybe a SIM that's more targeted around security data?
Yeah, I mean, I really love the saying that all data is security data, right? We often don't realize how much of the data that we're creating is related in some way to security, right? Whether that's physical security or information security, it all tells a story. And when the story is disconnected, you don't get a full picture. And that's where, again, in a little bit later, you do see a survey question about what data do we integrate. And it is a really important thing. Like, why aren't we integrating more data that isn't just from your firewall, for example, or DNS, right? But data from like maybe your HR platform. So yeah, I mean, great segue into a later question, Mitch.
Good. We're going to go there, and I think a step to get there is this next question, where we ask where there are gaps. So let's say you are aggregating or pulling your data together into one of these types of tools, and observability, platform monitoring, et cetera. What kind of gaps exist? And I think I know this one struck you pretty strongly, Amy, in terms of what some of those gaps are. Probably some familiarity with these gaps, correct?
Yeah, so for me, I realized that this question, if it was multi-choice as well, maybe people would choose a lot more. But one thing that struck me, this is like an overall thing, was the gap is that data has no context. Like that we have data, that we produce data, that we're storing it, but like, what is it telling us, right? And that's where the context is king, is that the gap here is that we're not able to understand what's happening in our environment for multiple different reasons. I think the third question, the third answer was really significant to me. It kind of relays on this idea that like there's a lot of data schemas out there. Um, and we kind of have our own opinion. I don't know, Erin, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of gaps that exist today in the observability space into your data. I like to think, like Amy had mentioned, security data and enterprise data, it's still data at the end of the day. And so some of those core components or core capabilities that you have at the enterprise level, you want to make sure you're bringing that into your security space, or vice versa. If you have best practices that you're using in security, you're communicating that with the enterprise. With a lot of these organizations, you don't have all of it in one lens or in one spot for you to easily search the information. That might be because of, we see here 21% say they don't have a lack of a consistent schema. There's a lot of schemas that exist out in the market. Within the DataB product ourselves, we are utilizing the OCSF schema. And OCSF is really the open cybersecurity framework. And it really is designed for the SOC and cybersecurity analysts to find all of the data that they're dealing with, whether it's on-prem, traditional tools in the cloud, various vendors. It normalizes all of this data into one platform so that you can look at it no matter what data source is coming into the platform from a consistent view. So I have one field that references IP, whether that's coming from my CrowdStrike data, my Palo Alto data, Zscaler data, IBM, Okta, any of the other industry vendors that exist out there. I know that when I'm searching in this schema, IP means IP. And so having that transparency into what is the data, what is the definitions, and how can I easily access it across multiple different personas within your organization just makes those gaps in observability a lot smaller.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that with OCSF, like the idea too is that it's not domain specific. We're looking at it almost from like an event perspective, and it allows more connections between the different data points. We know that OCSF is still in its infancy, we're aware of it. It's only, I think last year at Black Hat, it was like the second year, and many adjustments. And I'm even in the Slack channel for it too, which is really fun to kind of see the progress. But with that said, I mean, the DataB product does have a lot of extensions that we realize that needed to be created to make those connections between the data points. So it's very interesting. And by the way, everyone, this is a live recording. So if you do have questions, go ahead and answer them in the chat. Aaron and I have been media trained.
There's a great question in there already.
Yes, the Q&A
Lynn
tab.
asked for it. Can you discuss the importance of centralizing and aggregating security data from various sources within the organization to gain a comprehensive visibility insights? So why is that so important?
Yeah, I'll take that and then I'll turn it over to Amy. So I think without having all of that data centralized, normalized, and I'm going to go back to the exact wording of the question, centralized and aggregated from various sources into one comprehensive report or visibility platform, you're going to spend a lot of time jumping from tool to tool to tool to get one view that you then maybe put into a PowerPoint presentation that gets put up to your CISO and then from the CISO up to the board. If you had one centralized place that was aggregating all of that information, whether it was from your compliance use case or for your security team or for your threat hunters, everyone's looking off the same data. And so you no longer are having perforations of what I can consider one lens of the truth. Everyone's using the same data, so you have one source of truth that can answer multiple different personas questions, which then allows for easier ways for you to get the information quickly. But then it also allows for personas within the organization, whether it's someone on the security team or someone within the compliance space, to have conversations together that might not have previously occurred. So by working with the compliance team that's maybe we're focused on an audit, and then a securities persona that is focused on an incident that had just occurred, everyone's looking at the same data. And so if you have questions, you're no longer locked into just the data silo or that group that you've been interacting with that data. You can reach out across and really understand how are other people using this, what are they doing, how are they doing it, and then leverage the insights and knowledge that they have to bring back into your organization.
Yeah, I love that, Erin, because what you're basically talking about is data quality, data integrity, data trust. Because a lot of the things that we're experiencing, and this is so funny because I always think this is like, the adversaries are helping each other out. And why are the good guys, right, not able to get the data that they need? Like if you have, for example, two different firewalls, which is pretty common for enterprises, right? Because maybe one firewall is really good for HQ, one is really good for your road warriors, right? When you look at the logs, they might say the same thing, but they're saying it in a different way. The fields are different, and so it's time that we kind of bring the data together, and having that single enriched, shareable, accessible data set is going to be really big difference in the way that you do reporting, the way that you have visibility, the way that you give access to the right people to have the right answers when they need it.
Yeah, there's one analogy that I like to use is if we're thinking about the different personas or teams, I like to compare it to like languages that people speak. So maybe the compliance team is speaking English, the security team is speaking French, and another team is speaking Spanish. And we're all trying to ask, I don't know, what's the weather today? Or where do I find an IP, making it more security focused. I don't speak Spanish or French or Italian or any of the other languages that these individuals speak. But if we normalize it all into a common language, in this case for security data, it's OCSF. In the world, most people speak English, whether it's as a second language or a primary language. We all know when someone's asking, what is the weather today?
Yeah.
Great analogies. I'll just add it also cuts down on the treasure hunts for data. We have that data somewhere. Let's go find it. Okay, rather than let's get the answer to our question. What's the state of our endpoint security or whatever it might be, et cetera. So Cool. And I'm going to be popping the slides up and down sometimes when we're having some good dialogue. So don't let that throw anybody off. Is there any more comments we want to make on this one? Or are you ready to go to the next
We
question?
can jump to the next one, but I wanted to say one thing. I've heard so many times from my friends who are security practitioners. They're like, "Oh my God, do I have the Windows events logs?" Like, and then they realize, oh, they don't, and then that happens a lot where you're like doing an investigation and you're like, "Do I have this data? Do I have that data?" And then they're like, "Oh my gosh," and so I think it's I've luckily not been in their shoes. I've heard their stories and I buy them a beer and tell them I'm sorry. But
And that's a bad time to find out you don't have it. Right?
yeah.
And then I did want to go to one question that we had in the chat. For clarification
Oh, yeah.
purposes, are we saying all enterprise security data is stored in the SIM as centralized security data? I think for this question, it was really open-ended. It was, are you storing it in your SIM? Are you storing it in another data lake? Are you storing it in X, Y, and Z? And so our recommendation is definitely not to send everything to the SIM. It's very cost ineffective. And it's going to be hard for other personas to use that data outside of the security and threat hunting space.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were trying to comprehend out of all the ways you may collect this data and store it, what are some of the gaps that you're experiencing? So really good point. Let's move to our next question. I think this was a pretty an obvious one, but it's good to validate. Basically our silos, data silos impacting your effectiveness, right? Your ability to, delays in responding to investigations or communicating, doing data consolidation, et cetera. So pretty strongly, the answer was hit yes here. I don't think we have to go too much more in detail. Let's see of you want to comment on this before we move on.
No, I think it's kind of just alludes to the challenge that we have in security of getting all the data in one space, because each persona and every team has a different way and a different place in which they're storing it.
Yeah.
Well, I have one question for you, Erin.
Yeah.
Is what is your feelings on a security data lake? Because it sounds a little bit like maybe that could help reduce the impact.
Yeah, so I think if you have a security data lake or just a data lake in general, it definitely breaks down those silos, because you can have different user rights and privileges across different schemas and databases, but all of that data is still stored within one place, which then allows you to have no delays or little delays between consolidation, investigation, and working across the tools, because it's all going to be within the one data lake tool.
Can you give a kind of working definition of a data lake for someone who might not know what that is?
Yeah, so you can think of a data lake as a centralized repository for all of your data that's in a normalized and common schema, or transformed into a normalized state. Most of those, the most common ones that you see within the market today are going to be Databricks and Snowflake.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Good. Great stuff. Okay. This question on improving your security workflow. What's most important? Integrating across silos? Well, that kind of hits that question. Enabling real-time security compliance reporting. One of the use cases. Standardized schema. We've talked a little bit about that with OCSF. Automated data cleansing. That's one of the things, if you haven't gone through this before, the whole data cleansing and data transformation can be a massive and sometimes daunting task if you don't have the right tools to do that kind of thing. Erin, do you want to jump in with your reactions on this, and of course Amy as well?
Yeah, I think it just is really alluding to that importance of breaking down the silos that we have in security data. We have several teams that are working to answer maybe not the same question, but very similar questions. And so it's how can we break down those silos so that way we have one source of truth across that data. We have real-time reporting, so we're no longer waiting for an audit to understand what our security posture is. We have a common schema that makes it very easy to look at the data and understand what it's trying to tell us. And then by having all of those, you are then improving your security workflow to help with the ever-evolving threat landscape and data regulations that are coming down, such as like NIST 2.0, PCI 4.0. But as our adversaries continue to increase and the way that they attack our network, we need to be able to increase our efficiency to defend it. And so by improving that security workflow, we're going to be able to focus on those more high value tasks and not the mundane things that you have to do because the data is not in a good spot.
Yeah. And I will add that I know a lot of my, a lot of my friends were a bit shocked by this when I was chatting with them and I was getting their perspective, and they're like, oh, I thought that the last question, the last answer, the one that says stay ahead of threats and privacy and data regulations was going to be their most important thing, because for them it's all about stopping breaches, right? But what I'm seeing from this is the top 3 answers were really significant to me. It stemmed from a business problem, is that it's not just about what can your data do, right? Your data can help you protect your business better, but also give you the insights to make sure that you have the air cover and closing the gaps as well. And then one of it was, so one of the answers, and sorry, my screen is so teeny tiny, is automating data cleansing and integration into common data store. This one really spoke out to me because during my time at Splunk, I was learning SPL and I was learning all the different data sources, and it stood out so much to me that different data sources, whether they're categorized as a EDR tool, right? And we know some EDR tools that are very, very noisy, and we know that there are some, firewall logs that might say the same thing or might look really similar, but have a totally different way of formatting, right? And what I realized with working with customers is that data cleansing, this idea of parsing data, is really intricate. It's not an easy task by any means. And it takes years of hands-on knowledge, both in the industry, but also in the products themselves, to be able to say, hey, that looks exactly what this one is saying. So you know what? I think together they're saying this. And I know finger pointing and stuff makes it's imagine there's 2 forks in the road and you're merging into one or something. But yeah.
Something that's been referenced to, I think once or twice, was organizational data, HR data, things like that, which the next to the last option on this question talks about integrating organizational data. Why is that valuable? What's the benefit of thinking about more broadly than just our security lens of what kind of data is helpful?
Yeah, so I can take that. What we found is from our internal security data fabric, by having all of that organizational data and business logic integrated with the security data, we were no longer, I'm going to take this more on the compliance route, but we were no longer having to wait till the audits or for a quarterly review to understand, where is my posture? Am I going to be rated an A this quarter, or am I going to be rated an F? And then if so, why? Because if you get your report card and you don't know why you're rated a specific thing, you're going to have a lot of questions. And so by bringing in that organizational context to your data, you're able to pinpoint on a continuous basis, how am I doing within the specific control, the specific space? And then you could have those roll ups. So it's no longer going to be me looking at just my results. It's going to be my boss is looking at my results compared to maybe Amy's results compared to other peers in the organization. And so we can compare across to say, okay, Amy's got 20 assets on her that she owns. I have 30 assets that I own, but Amy doesn't have any of her vulnerabilities patched. Well, we probably need to fix that. And so by having that organizational data added in along with the business logic, we're able to pinpoint the who and the what a lot faster when it comes to security threats or compliance remediations.
Yeah, in a large organization, especially in enterprise, the number of people with their kind of fingers in the pie that may be generating or security data or doing things that impact security, that could be really tough to nail down. I mean, just to chase it down, who is it that I need to talk to that can help us understand what's happening here?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we saw, and I think a lot of companies have this challenge is you have rogue assets that exist on the network that you don't know who the owner is. What applications are they touching? How are they being utilized? But it has a vulnerability that needs patched, but we have no way to understand who's responsible for fixing that asset. And so by having this organizational context added in, we're able to provide those insights and that what we call in the DataB platform entity resolution and entity hygiene or security hygiene, where we can provide you those insights based off of what that asset's done and how it's interacted with the network, who's touched it, when they've touched it.
Very good. Amy, this is the question you were referencing earlier that we finally have gotten to. So get your input on this. Which of the following do you currently integrate with security data? So what's your reaction to the response, and what should we be doing?
Well, one, for the 11% that aren't integrating any of this non-security data with their security data, what are you guys doing? Oh my gosh. But the one of the things that is always a big yikes is like financial data, because that's always a sticky situation and all of that stuff. But for me, what was most significant was the top two. Asset data, when we're doing, or when there's a critical event, you want to be able to contain and isolate like that maybe that rogue asset or that compromised asset or device, right? But what if you don't know who owns it? That's a really difficult situation. And why I bring up the second one too is that if you knew, for example, that compromised asset or device, that person is out of the office, they're on vacation, they're in Thailand, something like that, right? And but you still need to make sure that asset or device is off the network. You want to be able to see who is above that person and reach out to their manager or their manager's manager and get them involved in the situation, right? And that's really hard when you don't have insight into the organization or insight into assets, ownership, and being able to maybe even make a suggestion, because sometimes you have deprecated users that are still on the name of the asset, but you want to still be able to, in a critical situation, like I said, still contain the situation.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting question too. If you look in the Q&A David submitted, are there cases where CCPA and GDPR privacy regulation are roadblocks to creating a security data lake? Is that a concern when you're going about this? Or on the other hand, does creating one actually help address compliance regulations in the storage of sensitive personal information and other personal data? That sounds like a data expert question for you, Erin.
Yeah, so I would say I don't think it is a roadblock. I think it helps in both of those cases because most data lakes allow you to have row level security, database security. They have anonymization that can be done within the tool as well. So where you have SPI or other personal data that is being stored, you can anonymize that directly in the tool. So that way, different personas, so maybe you're in legal and you need to have access to that SPI information. You can have a role that's dedicated that has access to that. Or if you're in compliance, or maybe, I don't know, as a security team, you don't necessarily need to have all of the SPI data surrounding a specific individual or ways that they are interacting with a product. And so you can mask specific fields and de-identify those, but still allow it to be helpful to the security teams, because even though it's masked, you're still getting the insights that roll up together during those different attacks and different events. With GDPR and CCPA, there are specific regulations that you have to follow. And the data lakes most times have been certified within several different regulations, whether that's ISO, NIST, GDPR, CCPA. And so it would just be a matter of identifying which of the data lake vendors have all of the required approvals that you need within your organization. So I think it actually helps accelerate that, because rather than having multiple different ways and places that you need to store this information, it's all stored within one. And then it has the necessary security to give you only access to what you need.
Very good. Amy, anything you want to add?
No, I know we wanted to show a demo, so.
Yep, I was just going there next. Thank you. Perfect straight person for that. So we're going to be doing a demo, or Aaron's going to be doing a demo of Database. So why don't you set this up for us for kind of what we're going to be looking at?
Yeah, okay, 1 second. Amy, if you want to take that while I share my screen.
Oh, which one? What?
Just kind of give some context for what we're going to be seeing.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was like, I'm ready. Yeah, so as Erin mentioned, DataBee is a security, risk, and compliance data fabric. It actually is designed after a security data fabric that we have in-house at Comcast. And just imagine this, right? Comcast is a Fortune 29 company. We're not just a cable company. We also own amusement parks. So if you've ever been to a Universal Studios, if you've ever been, if you've watched Oppenheimer, for example, we have movie studios, things like that. Our portfolio is large, and part of that is also means that we have a lot of data, and we take security very seriously here. So when we were thinking about it, right, we looked at ways that we could optimize how we looked at the data. How do we optimize the cost of our data as well? And we came up with this concept of taking a data fabric and leveraging for security, because security has so much semantics. And as I was saying, you can be years deep into a technology and tool and industry and still struggle. So part of this solution that we're bringing to market is a really unique where we are leveraging the expertise within Comcast, a real company that uses a tool like this, but then also bringing it to market in a way that scales, because we have GTM leaders from Palo and Splunk and Zscaler and Qualys and RSA. So you have like the best of both worlds, really. Like, for example, we have methodology to our releases and all of that fun stuff. So, it's been really fun so far to have so much like access to world-class knowledge at the same time.
Fantastic. Take her away, Aaron.
Awesome. So this is the DataBee platform, and this is the overview / landing page. So this is really supposed to provide that holistic insight, one-stop shop of how is my data that's been brought into the platform performing? Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? How much data have I actually brought in? So here we can see how many unhealthy feeds we have, how much data has been written into the data lake within the last week. So this is all demo data, so you'll see some funny names and dates in here. So just want to preface with that. But we also have like our feed health. So as we're looking at the data, we can bring in all of these. We have around 200 supported feeds today. So we bring in each one of these various feeds. We can understand the status of them. So we can see, okay, is it been disabled? So the user has disabled this. Is there an error? Is it healthy? Who's the owner of this data? So Dwight Schrute might be the owner of our Windows DNS logs. And then we can see what's the trending of that over time. When was the data last seen? So you can see we disabled the Palo Alto firewall, and it was last seen on March 17th. But we're seeing data for the DNS logs all the way through to the 20th. And then we have here as well, if something is in an unhealthy state, we also provide context. Every time you hover over one of these icons, you're going to get details of what does it actually mean. Down below that, we also have this is fully customizable. So you can add new widgets, change these widgets. But the way that I have mine set up is the next segment of my dashboard is to look at the user activity. How many users have logged in within the last week? And then how many users, going back to that asset attribution and ownership question, how many users have the most owned devices? So Jeremy Miller has 6 devices that he owns, Taylor Jones 5. And so I'm able to see within the last week, who are the ones who have the most assets and why do they have the most assets? The next one is the device activity. And so I can look at how many devices do we have without ownership. And so I can see over the last week, I've had 4 fewer devices. So that means we have devices where we previously didn't have ownership, but we now have the ownership on those. So that's gone down. I'm also able to see the devices with potential owners. So in the DataB platform, we have an entity resolution IP and patent that we've been granted that allows us to do this correlation and show potential ownership from a device to an owner. And so we can see, okay, for this device, server's account or server 33 HR, Mackenzie Marshall is our top recommended owner. And then secondary, we have Rachel. And then the last component, which is really interesting from the security side, is our security threats. So what I showcase here is just the devices by day. How many devices have been seen? How many of those devices have security findings? So I can see, okay, this DB47 sales is got 4 security findings within the last day. That's probably the first one that I want to take action on. And then I can see which ones are the highest severities within the last few days. So, within the last day. All of these you're able to customize the time frame on. So I can change how often does it get refreshed, what's the statistic that I'm wanting to look for. And instead of looking at this at a day level, maybe I want to look at it at a week. So I don't want to go in every day and look at my security threats, but maybe it's on a weekly level because I know that we are doing great within our organization.
Erin, there's a question about what does unhealthy status interpret?
Yeah, so unhealthy really looks at the data sourcing the data that's been processed typically across that feed, and then says whether or not it's less than usual. So I think if it drops below a certain threshold, I don't know what that is. I would have to go back to the team to find that exact number. I want to say if it's under 50% of what it regularly is seeing through the platform, then we showcase it as unhealthy. We also have within this is a good segue to the next part of the demo, which is our data sources pane. And so within each one of those feeds that you were seeing on that main screen, you can dig into the data source pane. This is how you add new data sources, understand the data quality score. And so I'm able to click on each one of these. So since we were talking about the unhealthy, I can click on the Windows security events data and I can see, okay, it's down 95 points within the last 24 hours. It's unhealthy. Who the owner of this data feed is. So if I need to go take action on it, who's the person that I need to reach out to? What's the vendor name? When was it configured and last ingested? So the reason that this one is showing unhealthy is because it was the data through here is through the 20th, and the last time we saw this data was March 19th at 8 p.m. And so you're able to look at that. And then we also have this view data quality score. So we can see how many items were mapped, what's the feed bandwidth, how many records there are, the mapping efficiency, and then the change within the last 24 hours. So it's went down within the last 24 hours, which is why it's showing as unhealthy. Hopefully that answers that. I can't see the chat. And then also within this data sources panes, we have the option to add new data sources. So like I had mentioned, there's 200 supported feeds today. We do put them in alphabetical order. And you can show most of these results as well. However, you have the capabilities to search by a specific platform. So maybe I want to onboard CrowdStrike. So I can click on CrowdStrike. We have 3 different ways for really that we support today. So Azure Blob, an on-prem data connector, AWS S3, and then some of our feeds also support direct API connections as well. And so you would select how you would like to configure your feed. Maybe it's via AWS. Put in the information, and as you go through these configuration steps, the log source information is going to fill in and showcase like, okay, you're 1/3 there, 2/3 there, 3/3, and now the feed is ready to be put into production.
Yeah.
Once you have the data put into the platform, that's really where it starts to enable all of the really cool insights. So within this, we have several different security entitlements. So the first one being our active detective stream. So these are really looking at different Sigma detections that you can put into the platform. We do not have our own language for looking at active detections. We're using Sigma just because it's open source, and we wanted to meet the customer where they are. So if they have different rules or detections that they're using today via other platforms, we wanted them to be able to easily incorporate those into this platform as well. And so here we can see, okay, what are the detections that we've seen within the last X time frame? You can filter to a specific detection type, a specific criticality level, a status. So is it stable, tested, and depreciated, unsupported, etc. And then within each one of these, you're able to then drill down. So if I'm looking at this credential dumping attempt, it's a high severity. It was a test, so not necessarily much we needed to drill into. But anywhere I have this icon, the magnifying glass icon, I can see the detection details. So when was the detection created? What's the description of the detection? How many false positives were there? What's the log source? So how did we bring this data in? So in this case, we brought it in via the Windows process access. And then what's the title of this? And then when was it last updated? So really giving you more detailed insights into what the detections are. The second component of our security space is the findings, which is where I think is the most interesting. This is where your threat engineers or threat analysts would go in. And this is really what findings have we found within your network based off of the data that you've shared within the DDB platform. And so I can see here over time how many findings there are day by day. So maybe there's a trend or a theme that you're noticing. I'm getting attacked more often at like 10 p.m. at night or 6 a.m. in the morning. And so I want to focus on those ones versus the midday ones. Or maybe my high severities are always occurring at this specific time. And so what's great is you can actually filter down to specific criticality levels. So in this case, I'll look at just the critical ones. And now my histogram and all of my data below is going to filter to only the findings that are of critical status. So I can see I have 4 that I've showcased across the last week. And then I can see down below, what are the actual findings? What's the confidence level of those? What's the state? Are they unresolved? Are they suppressed? Is it a new finding? So in this case, I probably want to focus on the new finding. Why is it a finding? Who's responsible? What asset or device is it on? Again, you can click on the security finding to figure out additional details. So here we show you all of the process data and how it's gotten into the platform. So one of the things that DataB is trying not to be is a black box solutions. A lot of times within the security space, you purchase a tool, but you don't understand what goes on in the background. We want to expose some of that and allow you the ability to drill in as far as you need to get to the data. And so we can see here, this was created based off of a Sigma rule for the hack tool review execution. The attack category, we can show those 3. We have the finding, what type of finding it is. Then we also show you how do we pull this information in. So we brought this in due to the Microsoft Sysmon. It is tied to this specific device. And so we really are showcasing to you how we are pulling in the data, and then we can compare that with the raw data as well. Within each one of these, we also have the ability to pivot across. So anywhere you see this little chain link icon, you can double click into it, and that's going to pop you to a pivot of looking at that specific asset. And so here we can see this is the DB47. It's an IoT device. It belongs to the engineering organization. It's a laptop. When it was first seen, last seen, the operating system, who the potential owners are. So in this case, we don't have an ownership of this device, but we're showing you with 94% confidence that coding most likely is the owner of that. We also can show this at a point in time. So it's always going to show to the current date. But you can also change this to say, okay, I want to look back and go to 3 days ago, 4 days ago, 5 days ago, whatever that time frame is. And then you can always change that up here. Down below, we can see how many findings there were from a database, how many have related entities, and how many correlated events there are. But what's great is rather than having to pivot in between multiple different tools to figure out the timeline of this asset, we provide you that directly into the tool itself. So we can see on March 26th, here's the specific items that occurred. The 25th, here's a specific item. And then again, each one of these, you're able, wherever there's a magnifying glass, to dig in and find out more details. You can also suppress this. So maybe you've looked at an event and you find that it's no longer relevant. You can click suppress that event, and that's going to go to our 3rd stage of the security tool.
Yeah.
What's great about oh, go ahead.
No, Erin, I was going to say this has been, I want to make sure that we give a chance to have any last minute chats or Q&A as well. There was one where I think you might be able to answer as, I think it was Nadia. What challenges do you face in managing enterprise data security, and how do you overcome it? I think hopefully, how would you answer?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is It really depends on the organization, to be honest. The most common one that we are seeing enterprise data security face is the data silos. And then getting all the teams on board with a common strategy to move forward with, because a lot of folks have their piece of the pie that they want to own, and they don't want to give up their piece of the pie with not knowing that there might be a 3-layer cake down the line. That's way better. And so getting everyone on board is, I think, one of the biggest challenges you face, but that's really got to come from either a top-down or bottom-up approach. It really just depends on the organization.
Yeah, and I know we don't have much more time, and that's okay. I think we can talk to it, but can you talk about like the outcomes of a security data fabric using a platform like DataB?
Yeah. What was the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, so the question is, what are some of the outcomes of using a security data fabric?
Yeah, so using a security data fabric, it kind of lends to all the questions that we talked about at the beginning of the call. And it breaking down data silos, having a single source of truth, having data that's of great quality, having a unified data set, having multiple different personas using the same information, and being able to answer complex questions very quickly rather than having to pivot in between multiple different tools.
Yeah,
but Mitch, I would love Mitch's thoughts on that too.
He's on mute.
Glad I'm not the only one who still does.
Yeah, just company for you there of the non-muters. So I was just thinking, in just a short period of time that we had to look at DataB, I was just imagining myself like what it would take to go pull all that data together, what it would take to not only pull it together in a way that I can look at it and get insights or information, et cetera, from it, but also be able to dig down into, so where did this come from and who is it and what is it being generated? What is generating this information? So you've got, because that's always the question is, I've got this data, but I don't really know what it is, if I can trust it, or if this is more valid than that. And putting it into a data security fabric is now you've taken that idea of a data lake and a data fabric and really applied a security lens to it, if you will, to be able to perform tasks, answer questions, and provide business value as well as operational value. And you don't have to go do that all yourself. I mean, that's built for you. And now you're really about integrating the data the best way possible. And to your point, you're not dictating what sources are. It can come from virtually anywhere, right? So to me, it's the best of all worlds, I think. Very impressive.
And I'll leave with two big takeaways here is like a security data fabric has multiple use cases. Like you can reduce security audit stress. You can prepare for PCI DSS 4.0 a lot faster. You can cost optimize your SIM. You can even aggregate multiple SIMs as well. You can get more of a 360 view on your asset and users, prioritizing critical assets, making your CMDB even more complete and enriching it and having more up-to-date information. There's quite a lot of different use cases. And I know we might not have answered the definition of what a security data fabric is, but consider what for a lot of the ideas that we kind of shared today is, there's this idea of auto ingestion, there's this cataloging and lineage, and being able to understand your data more, understanding your data better in an integrated layer that's accessible is really the key part that I want everyone here to take away.
Fantastic. And there's a pretty good write-up too in the Pulse Meter document, that report talking about data lakes and data security fabric, laying out some of the things that you're talking about too, Amy. That's a great resource for everybody. Well, I want to thank you both. I wish I would have talked less and just listened to both of you, because I learned a ton from what you're sharing today, and I feel like we're reaching into the the knowledge of the tribe or knowledge of the village of all the great things that have happened at Comcast, that have gone into building such a great technology and platform that you've now commercialized and are making available to everybody else. And both of you have been, I think, fantastic representatives of the tribe, of the village, of all the work that's gone in to bring us here. I want to mention too to everybody, there's a link if you want to get a custom demo. Everybody's got their unique challenges. They're in a different place. And I'm sure the DataB team can put together a conversation that will be super meaningful to you. You can click on that link. There's also a survey we'll ask everyone to complete for participating. And in there is hey, I'd like to talk to somebody about this. I've got this challenge. Last but not least, we are recording this, and everyone who's registered will get an email with a link to the recording, so you can watch again, share it with a friend, go home, tell the family all about the great webinar you went to today. I'm sure they'll really appreciate that. But enjoy. So, Amy, any parting words before we wrap up here? Okay.
Yeah,
all
awesome.
right.
Thanks everyone for joining. Again, if you want a demo, feel free to let us know. There is the request a demo link there. Happy to have you all on the call and excited to have you guys unlock the power of your enterprise security data on your own.
Fantastic. Thanks for closing this out there, Aaron. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we look forward to having another conversation with you all. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.